paintings and founded the FBI's National Art Crime Scene. I hear a lot of the suspects have been framed. Please welcome Robert K. Wittman. Hey, Mr. Wittman, thank you so much for coming on.
So welcome. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you all coming out tonight. You know, I think we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about art theft, about art crime. It's a bit different from art history. How many people here have had art history courses? Okay, good, good. So you all remember all those stories about the artists, right? You know, Van Gogh cutting off his ear. Yeah, and Renoir had to take brushes and tie them to his wrists because he had such bad arthritis. And Monet, of course, was blind, right, at the end of his life. But there's a big difference. Art history is not the same when we talk about art crime. And that's what we're talking about tonight. Art crime is about the business of art, okay? It's a $200 billion worldwide business. $200 billion legitimate art market every year. It's a lot of money, a lot of money. About 65 billion of that is sculptures, prints, and painting. That's what Sotheby's and Christie's sells, okay? The rest of it, though, is what we look at in the FBI and law enforcement as cultural property. And it's not necessarily sculptures, art, and prints. It could be, or photographs for that matter. That's part of the art market. It's things like collectibles, like, let's see, cars, antique cars. You know, ladies, if you have more than, say, one pair of Jimmy Choo shoes, you're a collector. Those are collectibles. And men, if you like watches, if you got more than one watch, you're probably a collector. You know, when I do these talks in Naples, not here, but in Naples, you know, the people, they sit in the audience and I say, those of you who have more than one husband or one wife, you're a collector too, right? That's what they collect. But everybody collects something. And that's part of this $200 billion industry. 40% of that industry, $80 billion, gets bought and sold in the United States. We are the #1 country in the world when it comes to consuming art, antiques, cultural property. #1 in the world. Sometimes we go back and forth with China, but in the last 5 years, 6 years since after COVID and before, it's been the United States again. It's because of our collecting, you know, abilities. There you go. So we're gonna get a clap on that one. That's good. So 40%, $80 billion in the U.S. Now here's what's interesting. I got a call back in the early 2000s, around 2005. I retired from the Bureau in 2008. I started the National Art Crime Team in 2005. And I got a call from headquarters. It was the PR people. And they wanted to know, the New York Times had called then, they wanted to know what was the size of the illegitimate art industry. In other words, how much art crime is out there in the world? So we did a research. We talked to the Art and Antique Squad at the Metropolitan PD in London. We talked to the Carabinieri. There's 300 Carabinieri investigators in Italy. That's all they do is art theft investigation. And we spoke to the OCBC, which is the art crime team in Paris. There's 35 members of that, Gendarmerie, National Police. And we came up with a figure of $6 billion a year. This is the illicit cultural property market every year. Now, that's actually gone up, I think, because of the value of art. You know, the art has become so expensive, and it's gone up so much with inflation and value, that I think it's more than that. Now, that $6 billion represents all types of crime. But I'm going to tell you today, and I know because of my business, Robert Wittman Incorporated, where we do these investigations, I'd say theft is probably 25% of that, maybe 2 billion, maybe 1.5 billion. The rest of it is frauds, forgeries, and fakes. Yeah. So if you're going to buy a Picasso on eBay, it happens. Make sure there's 2 S's in Picasso. Okay? Only 1 C. P-I-C, no C, no 2 C's, okay? 2 S's, 1 C in Picasso. Believe it or not, that's the #1 complaint to the FBI Cybercrime Center is people buying fraudulent material on eBay. Now, it's not because eBay's bad. eBay's just a marketplace. It's people putting it on eBay. And I can tell you some stories about that. I do a second talk called 3 F's of Art Crime, Frauds, Forgeries, and Fakes. Tonight we're going to do theft. So tell Julia that you want me back, and maybe she'll get me back to do that one. You'll like it. Anyway, so $6 billion in illicit cultural property, that's the market. So why do they steal art? What's the point, right? Well, you remember somebody, well, some of you probably remember Willie Sutton. Yeah, you remember. This is a photograph of Willie when he's going to go to Eastern State Prison in Philadelphia. He got caught, and on the way to the prison, a reporter said, Willie, why were you robbing banks? And that's what he did. And Willie said, of course, that's where the money is. And then later on, of course, when he got out of jail, he wrote a book called That's Where the Money Is. So Willie Sutton kind of told the story. It's because that's where the money is. Let's talk a little bit about the money. This is amazing. Look at this. This is a Tom Brady rookie card, okay? How many people here are Patriots fans? All right, good for you. I was in Boston last week. Good for you and you. I was in Boston last week. It was great. I'm from Philly, by the way. Anyway, so Tom Brady's rookie card from 2000, the year 2000, it's autographed. He signed it. And I'm going to tell you, tonight, when you buy a Priceless copy, I'm going to sign that for you. Now, think about this. That card sold for $2.2 million. What do you think Priceless will go for? No. So $2.2 million for a Tom Brady rookie card from the year 2000. The next one is a Action Comics. It's Superman. It's the first time Superman appeared in comic books from the 1930s. But that one sold for $3.5 million for that comic book. Now, another one has sold since then for over $5 million. So just to give you an idea, these people are collectors. They're collecting these things. The Mario Brothers. How many of you have had children from the 80s? I do. Children from the 80s and grandchildren maybe? Yeah, well, if they played video games, if you got a Mario Brothers video game somewhere, Nintendo, in the attic, this one sold for $660,000. Okay? I mean, this is where the money's going. And then the last one, I mean, I see some guys in here might remember Mickey Mantle. I do. Remember? He was 1952. He started in the big leagues. That's his Topps Mickey Mantle rookie card. It's not signed. It's just the card. Look at the price. $12 million. You know what that means? That means if any of you guys have a baseball card collection at home and you have a rookie card, it might not be in good shape. It might be terrible. Maybe you had it on the spokes of your bike. Remember that? And it'll make the noise, or you pitched them. Remember how you pitched baseball cards? If you have one of those Mickey Mantles, it's worth $100,000 at least. Yeah? Think about that. Yeah, so you got this baseball card collection, and criminals know this. Okay, this is not publicized. It's all over the papers. Criminals know it. So what's better? Steal a Mickey Mantle rookie card from somebody and maybe get a couple of $100,000, or go to a bank, rob the bank, and get less than $1,000. That's the average amount from a bank robbery in the U.S., less than $1,000. And it's a federal crime. So when you get caught, the feds are after you. This Mickey Mantle rookie card, you got your collection at home. So somebody comes in and burglarizes your attic and steals your rookie card, and you call the police, and you say, hey, somebody stole my baseball cards. What do you think they're going to say? We're really sorry. We're really sorry they did that. They have no idea that this thing could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. All right? So that's why you have to be careful, and that's why you have to understand, like what Willie Sutton said, it's where the money is. That's why there's art crime. And of course, this is all just collectibles here. That's not talking about art itself. Salvador da Vinci, Salvador Mundi, it's a Leonardo da Vinci painting that was recently recovered and discovered. It was, I guess it was conserved, cleaned up, and it sold a few years ago, not long, in the 2020s, for $450 million. This is the most expensive painting ever sold. And it went to Arab Sheik. So $450 million, right? So, that's why criminals follow the money. And that's why they're looking at art and collectibles, because it's worth a lot of money. So what's going to protect you guys? Now, you're all good old American citizens. We're all here together. These are the federal art theft violations, the statutes, the laws that are used and investigated to protect you. So if someone comes into your home and they steal something worth $5,000 or more and transports it to Georgia across the state line, it's a violation of the Interstate Transportation of Stolen Property statute. It's investigated by the FBI. So remember, $5,000 or more crossing a state line, knowing it to be stolen. Pretty easy. The hardest part of that is proving that they knew it was stolen, because that's always the defense. I had no idea it was stolen. You know, that's what they always say. Well, you have to be able to prove that. But other than that, it's pretty easy to prove. Theft of major artwork, we're going to do that one next. That is the newest artwork. That's the newest law that's been passed. And if you notice, of all those statutes, that's the only one that has the word art in it. Notice that? You're a very perceptive crowd, I can see. It's the only one that says art. And that's because it was the only one that was actually passed by Congress to protect artwork in museums. I'm sure Christina back there will be happy to know that her Southeast Photography Museum is protected by the federal statutes. And what it says basically, that statute, which was passed in 1995, it was put forth by Ted Kennedy from Boston, well, from Massachusetts. And what it says is if someone goes into a museum in the United States and steals an object of cultural heritage, now Congress had to identify what that is. It's an object in the care or custody of the museum that's worth $5,000 or more and over 100 years old, or $100,000 any age. So if someone goes in and steals that from a museum, it's a federal crime. And that's great, protects museums from thieves. But there's a second part to that, and that says anyone who tries to sell, exhibit, transport an object of cultural heritage, remember $5,000 or more over 100 years old or $100,000 in value, is also now can now be prosecuted for the theft of major artworks. There's an A and B section, and that B section is really important. Why is that? Because if someone steals a painting or a photograph from the museum here, and it goes away, and 10 years from now we find it, the person who has it has to turn it over, even if they bought it in good faith, because it's stolen from a museum. And remember, carrying custody or transport or exhibit of it, just having it is a federal crime. Now, that was put forth by Ted Kennedy. And my Boston guy, why do you think Ted Kennedy would put a law in the books like that? There you go. Yeah, it's a result of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum robbery. How many people here know about that? Good. Okay, let me ask this question. How many people don't know about it? Good. Okay, so here's what I'll do. I'm going to tell you about the Isabella Stewart Gardner. For those of you who know about it, don't listen. Okay, but in 1990, two individuals dressed as Boston police officers. They went to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, a very fine museum. It's not as good as the Barnes in Philadelphia, but it's all right. No, just kidding. It's a great museum. Anyway, they went into this museum. It was St. Patrick's Day night, about 1 o'clock in the morning. There were two guards in the museum at that point, 1990. So they're dressed as policemen. They go into the museum. They knock on the door at the front, and they tell the guards, "We have an arrest warrant for one of you. We want to talk to you." So the guards, naturally, they let them in. That was against the rules, but they did because they thought they were police officers. Turns out, of course, they weren't. They were thieves. They were art thieves. So they took those guards into the basement, and they tied them to pipes in the basement. And for the next hour and 12 minutes or so, they went around the museum in Boston that night and stole 13 objects of art. One was a Rembrandt seascape known as The Storm over the Sea of Galilee. It's the only seascape Rembrandt ever did. Another one was a Vermeer called The Concert. It's only one of 35 Vermeers in the world. It's the only one that's missing. So the total value that night of that heist was $300 million. They took the 13 pieces. Now, none of those pieces have ever been discovered. We never got any of them back. I could do another talk for you where I did an investigation trying to get those back undercover, and that would be next time. But anyway, we never got any of those pieces back. Now, today, they're worth $500 million because of the inflation of the art market. $500 million, 13 objects of art, none have ever been recovered. And believe it or not, there's a $10 million reward for information leading to the recovery of the paintings. So if any of you know where they're at, give me a call, okay? Or anybody watching this on TV, give me a call. We'll see if we can work this out. Yeah, there's a $10 million reward. Let me tell you, that's very unusual. Usually when you have big rewards like that, you start to get leads. It's usually worked. But in this case, no leads. So they're still out there. They're out in the world. There's 13 objects of art with a $10 million reward. And as a result, Congress passed the theft of major artwork statute making it possible, at some point, remember this is 35 years now, possible at some point to get them back because they were stolen from a museum, so now they're in violation. Until that point, that wasn't the case because after 5 years, it's the statute of limitations, the theft can't be prosecuted. But now it can because possession is an ongoing crime. On and on, it never has statute of limitations. So anyway, that's why they passed the theft of major artwork statute. And if you really like the story of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, you should get the book Priceless. I talk about that investigation, how he came really close to recovering two of the paintings, the Rembrandt and the Vermeer, in the south of France. I had to go to Miami, Barcelona, Paris. It was awful. But somebody had to do it. And I was working undercover trying to get them back. We got a bunch of other paintings. We didn't get those too because I got my cover blown by the French police. But it happens. Anyway, so theft of major artwork is a result of that. Then we have Hobbs Act robbery. That's if someone goes into a commercial establishment and robs it. Well, that's a federal crime if it interferes in interstate commerce. Give you an example of that. I had a task force in Pennsylvania, in Philly, where we were chasing down these groups of robbers. They were doing smash and grabs all over the country and in jewelry stores, stealing Rolex watches, stealing diamonds, bringing them back to Philadelphia and selling them to the jewelers on Jewelers Row. So they would travel all over the country. They'd do 4 or 5 jobs. They'd come back. In the year that we started the task force, there were over 100 robberies that we ascribed to them. Well, we had ideas of who they were, but no concrete evidence. Finally, one of them did an armed robbery of a McDonald's in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And what did he do? He said, put the money right here. Well, that's good. Do you remember CSI? Fingerprints? Yeah. So we got the print. We were able to prove it was him. We brought him in. We what we call flipped him. And he told us about the robberies and who was involved. So at that point, I think we ended up arresting somewhere around 127 people that were all involved in the different gangs. And the next year, there was only three of those robberies that happened. And we used the Hobbs Act statute because he interfered in interstate commerce by robbery at that McDonald's. The point was, they sell beef. Now, that beef doesn't come from Pennsylvania. I don't know where it comes from, but it doesn't come from Pennsylvania. So as a result, they interfered. So that's why it can be used very well. And of course, then there's smuggling. How many of you have traveled outside the country? Oh, yeah, I'm sure you have. Did you buy any stuff to bring back? Of course you did. Okay. Well, you have to be careful because there's 18 countries that the United States has, memorandums of understanding, what they call MOUs, which are treaties that say it's illegal to bring antiquities back from those countries. Now, I'll give you an example. If you go to England, London, and you go to the Bermondsey Flea Market, if you go to that flea market and you buy a Roman coin and you bring it back to the United States, it could be illegal. All right, because we have a treaty with Italy, which doesn't allow their antiquities to come into the U.S. So you have to do a little bit of work on the State Department website to find out whether or not the country you're going to has those regulations and what those regulations are. It's not everything, but it's a certain amount of stuff. Italy and Greece is probably pretty much everything. But if you go to Cambodia, if you go to Thailand, if you go to Peru, Guatemala, all those countries have those regulations, even Mexico. So just be careful that you're not caught for smuggling. And I don't mean Cuban cigars. They're okay. All right, so mail fraud, wire fraud, those are the white-collar crimes of our crime. And basically they say that if someone uses the mail would be the U.S. Postal Service, FedEx, UPS, anything like that, ground carrier, air carrier, and they send you a contract or something in the mail that's fraudulent, that you rely upon to make a decision, and you lose something of value. Doesn't have to be money. Could be a trade, could be a lot of things. If that happens, you could be the victim of a mail fraud, which means you can be protected by the federal government. And wire fraud, of course, used to be newspapers, radio, television. Now it's internet. And of course, if you're going to get a contract, get it on the internet, get an email. Make sure that contract comes to you by email. Save the email for future purposes. If there's something in that contract that's not true, and you've been defrauded, then of course you have some recourse to protect yourself. So these are the statutes that protect all of you. Not only that, but I mean you have the local statutes of theft and that type of thing too. But these are the federal statutes that the FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, different federal agencies would use to prosecute any type of crime that you might be involved in. One of those public resources is the FBI Art Crime Team. That started in 2005. As I told you earlier, I think I told you, I recovered about $300 million worth of stolen art and cultural property around 20 different countries. And back in 2005, I came back to the States after doing a deal in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I said, you know, we don't have an art crime team. We had two guys. It was me and a guy named Jimmy up in New York. So Bob and Jimmy were the whole art crime division of the FBI. So I went to headquarters and I said, you know, we need to start our own team, just like the Carabinieri, the Italians, you know, the French have their OCBC, as I said. There's two squads in Spain, right in Madrid. The FBI had nothing. So we went to headquarters and we said, we need to start one. And they said, okay, they liked the good publicity. One thing about art theft, if you recover artwork, everybody's happy. You know, there's nothing, you know, bad about that. Nobody's going to make a complaint. So I said, let's do this art crime team. They said, okay. So I started with 8 agents nationwide, and they were all trained by us, you know, and myself and another person. And we were able to give them some background in art and whatnot. Mainly, they had to be good criminal investigators. And at one point, they said, you know, the headquarters said to me, the same guy who wanted the information about the New York Times, he said, you know, we want to come up with a really good logo. He said, we need something that would be catchy to put on the internet because we want a lot of help from the public to call in leads. So I said, okay. I said, okay, well, you know, let's do that. So we came up with this logo here for the art crime team. And what this was at the time the top 10 missing artworks in the world. And as you can see, Monk's Scream, that was at that point that had been stolen. That's been recovered. The piece behind the sea was a Da Vinci stolen from Scotland. That's been recovered. Above that is a small gold sculpture by Cellini. And that had been stolen. That's called the Salt Cellar out of a museum in Austria. And on the end behind the T is a Van Gogh. It's a landscape that was stolen from the Van Gogh Museum. That was recovered just a few years ago in the basement of a mafia member's mother's house in Sicily. So they got that back. So as a result, 4 out of the 10 pieces have been recovered. Those were the top 10 art crimes. Kind of followed the top 10 fugitive program. They were the top 10 art crimes at the time, 2005. So we got those back. We had nothing to do. We, being the FBI, had nothing to do with the recovery of any of those pieces. But since we had them on our website, we get credit. Anyway, if you look at that, and then they had to have the letters, right? You had to have these, you know, every FBI, CIA, DEA, you got to have the letters, right? So they wanted to come up with a catchy letter name. So I was sitting there, I was on the phone talking to these guys from headquarters, the PR people. And I was looking at the resumes of agents. I had 75 resumes came in from people who wanted to be on the team, which shocked me. Really what did. I mean, who wants to do artwork, right? Don't you want to catch fugitives and drug deals and all that? But no, I got 75 emails, the letters. So I'm talking to this guy on the phone, and he's the head of the PR for the FBI in Washington. And he says, hey, Bob, you know, Agent Wittman, we need a really good name for the team. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking at these resumes. It's federal. How about the federal, and we do art, we recover art. How about the Federal Art Recovery Team? And there was a silence on the phone. And I thought, well, what do you think? I mean, you know, I'm thinking, get off my back. You know what I mean? He says, I don't think that's going to work. I said, well, what do you think? He said, well, how about we just call it the Art Crime Team? So I figured, you know what it was? They couldn't fit 4 letters into the logo. True story. I didn't think they'd do it. I kind of had a plan, but I didn't think they would do it. So anyway, we started the Art Crime Team. They've recovered about, I don't know, last I heard, $500 million worth of stuff. And there's 25 agents on the team now. So it's kind of cool. You know, something I started back in 2005. They're still out there, and it's like 3 times as many people. So it takes 3 times as many to do what I did. Just kidding. Good thing for them. When I retired in 2008, though, I started my own company, and there was a reason. You know, throughout the years, I probably had 1,000 different calls, you know, leads that could come in. And I'd say 20% of them I could work on. The rest I couldn't have anything to do with. And the reason for that was because when we talk about the FBI, law enforcement, it's got to be a criminal case. And in the art world, 80% of the stuff's not criminal. It's going to be civil material. It's civil cases. People suing each other, provenance issue, history issues, you know, ownership, that type of thing. So most of the time, I couldn't do anything to help people. So when I started my own company, I got involved in doing all different types of investigations. So we do art recovery, we do collection management, due diligence and provenance reviews. You'd be surprised how many people buy stolen stuff not knowing to. They don't mean to, but they do. Expert witness testimony. Everybody sues each other in New York, and I'm always the guy saying, that wasn't good, you know. And then museum security. We just did the National Gallery in Washington. So that was an interesting survey. But nonetheless, you know, these are the things we get involved with. We do a little bit of everything now. I'll tell you, collection management's really important, especially for people like us, you know. And I put myself in the same category with you. It's just the way it is. You know, my kids aren't interested in anything I got, right? They're just not, okay? So they're telling me, Dad, get rid of it. Okay, you know, they don't want to have that situation where they got to come in and clean out my house. And I've had whole sets of parents pass away and I got their stuff. So I've been through it. You know, I've done it myself. And so knowing what you have is really important because that's how you save yourself from becoming the victim of a fraud, okay? I'll give you an example. I had a woman call me. She had a farmhouse in Potomac, Maryland. Potomac. Now, some of you may know where Potomac is. It's right outside of Washington, D.C. And, you know, it's probably one of the top 3 richest areas in the United States. And so she was right on River Road. She had a farm, and it was like the only farm left. It's a small horse farm. Everything else on that road is just mansions, okay? So she calls and she says, I just inherited this farm from my family. We've had it in the family for over 175 years. I said, wow, okay. And she said, well, in the basement, which is a dirt basement, there's dirt floors, there's all these old chests, you know, like, you know, the kind you would have on ships. And she says, we don't know what's in them. So we went down, we had to get bolt cutters, open up these locks. And she had one of the finest collections of first edition books anywhere. We actually had them appraised of about $2.5 million worth of books that her family had collected for 100 years. First editions, Moby Dick, you know, original pages from the Gutenberg Bible. I mean, literally, it was amazing what she had. She had an entire book written by Teddy Roosevelt when he was doing that trip down the Amazon. Well, she actually had the handwritten manuscript that he'd sent to Scribner because they were friends with the Roosevelt family. So, I mean, this is the stuff she had in her basement in these chests. So we took them all and we put them in environmentally friendly crates. You know, we categorized it, gave her an idea of the value. And we said, okay, well, do you want to sell it? She said, someday. I said, okay. And I said, well, what do you want us to do? You want to put it in storage? And she said, no, just put them in the bedroom. Oh, okay. So we did. I hope it's still there. I don't know, you know, but that's what happens. But now she knows what she has. That's collection management. That's knowing what you have. Right, Christina? Absolutely. Okay. The Southeast Museum of Photography, got to know what you got. That's right. So that's what we do now. So anyway, that's some of the stuff that we get involved with.
How is art crime committed? Because, you know, from the movies, you see, you know, a grid of lasers, and Catherine Zeta-Jones puts on a skin-tight suit, and somehow showing her butt helps get her through the grid.
Yeah, that's what we think of, isn't it? We think of these handsome, debonair, Oscar-winning art thieves. I mean, everybody loves art crime talks because it's so interesting from Hollywood. You have Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery. The movie was called Entrapment, remember? How many people saw Entrapment? Everybody saw Entrapment, right? Of course, the guy in the middle. Who's the guy in the middle? Pierce Brosnan, right. Pierce is a handsome, debonair, rich guy, right? I mean, hey, ladies, how many of you like Pierce Brosnan? There you go. All right. The reason I asked you that is because back when I first published Priceless, he called me, and he said he was interested in optioning the book for a TV show. I said, oh, that's cool. I said, are you going to play the role? And he said, no, I'm a movie star. I said, okay. Yeah. So it didn't work out. Just say it didn't work out. But the reason I tell you this is because I got his cell phone number, and for $50, I'll give it to you. All right? Anybody wants it? And of course, at the end is a gentleman there. He was in a movie in 1955 called To Catch a Thief. What's his name? You guys know? Cary Grant. Yeah, see, if I was in here with the kids, they have no idea, you know. But I tell them when I go talk to them that this is the Brad Pitt of the 1950s. But then again, they don't know him either. So I don't know who the new guy is. So whatever it is, it is. But these are the Oscar-winning art thieves that we think of that are handsome, debonair, beautiful, just amazing, rich, intelligent people. Yeah, the longer you look at that, the funnier it gets, you know. That's the real thieves. I mean, that's about $4 million worth of art theft that you're looking at up there. These are all people that I arrested, you know, in different crimes. It's not all the same group. As you can see, 3 of them are sort of dressed alike. That's not a coincidence. Okay, yeah. 3 of them are dressed alike. These 2 in the middle and here. And we're going to talk a little bit about them. This is 3 different cases, all right? The 2 on the outside were working together, and he was by himself. But this is the real thieves. They're not handsome, debonair, not beautiful women. They're not intelligent. If they're intelligent, we wouldn't catch them. Okay? This is the real thieves. So let's talk a little bit about that. Types of museum theft. There's insider theft. 90% of all the thefts that the FBI investigated and solved were internal jobs. We did a study. So actually it was 89%. So that tells you, you know, when you have a museum heist, like anywhere, it's probably going to be an inside job. That's who has access to the collection. It doesn't have to be a curator. It doesn't have to be a director. It doesn't have to be a person who works there. It could be an expert who goes in and, you know, and examines the collection. I've had those cases where they went in and stole things while examining the collection. One guy was stealing maps from Yale University. Another guy was stealing Japanese nesques from Princeton University. So it all depends. These are the types of things that happen. 90% could be a guard. I was at the Walters Art Gallery in Baltimore, and a guard had moved things around and stolen some items. So security, you know, it all depends. So 90% are insider thefts. The rest are armed robberies, like at the Boston Museum. That was an armed robbery. They had guns. And then burglaries, people who go in, who are unknown to the museum folks, who basically break their way in and steal. So we're going to talk about a couple of those types of cases right now. This one's called the Pensbury Man. How many people here from Philly? Anybody? Got a couple of you? Yeah. Allentown? Okay. That case is, I locked up people in Allentown. And you guys are from Philadelphia? Good, good. This case is the Pensbury Manor. You might have visited there at some point in Bucks County. Pensbury Manor was the home of William Penn. Very famous homestead. It's part of the Pennsylvania Museum Commission's, museum houses. It's located right outside of north of Philadelphia in Bucks County, and that's where Penn he lived. And what he would do is he would go down to the city in the morning because of the Delaware River. There was a tidal river, and at night he'd come on his boat, go back up, and go home. And he created the Pensbury Manor for his family. And he lived there from 1683 to 1700. And I know that because it says it on that plaque right there. I'm not a Pennsylvania historian, but just say, yeah, I'm very astute to those things. So, yeah, he was, that's where he lived for 17 years after he created the house. So what happened was there was a group of guys, and I'm going to go back and show you the picture. Remember these 3 here? 1, 2, 3? Well, they were good friends. They were friends from grade school. And they decided they wanted to be antique pickers. So what they would do is they'd go out and they'd go pick antiques from trash. They were trash pickers. You guys have all seen the pickers on History Channel. That ain't real pickers. Pickers are trash pickers. Okay, that's what they do. And I've had cases with lots of trash pickers, who picked up stuff. Usually it's good because they'll tell me where they got it, then I'll catch the criminals. But in this case, they were out picking trash. And they were selling it at an auction house, I'm going to tell you, in Bensalem. So you have an idea. It was a monthly, and the Bensalem auction house had a monthly antique auction. 3 weeks, they were just household goods. 1 time a month, antiques. So these guys would go out and find these pieces that were broken and whatnot. They put them back together, sell them at the antique auction. And they were making a little bit of money. They were pretty happy. Well, it was a March night, and what happened was there was nothing for them. They couldn't find anything to sell. So they got this brilliant idea. They said, you know what we could do? Let's go to that place we went to in the 5th grade for the school trip. Remember that William Penn place? And they said, let's go get some antiques from there. And we could sell them at the auction on Tuesday in Ben Salem. I told you they weren't smart, okay? They're not smart at all. So they decided to do that. So they go to the Pennsbury Manor. And what happens is they go in and they steal about 35 items, from the house. They actually went into the house 11:30 at night, it was Friday night. They had a few beers, so they were feeling very brave, had beer muscles. They go in, they steal these 35 items, and then they run out and they escape before the state police arrive. It takes about 17 minutes for them to arrive, they're already gone. So what happens, Saturday morning, of course, state police, they call me, because I'm the FBI, I'm now in Philadelphia, I do the art crime stuff. So they say, hey, we need some help. Can you come out and take a look at this with us and put some resources into it? Let's do an investigation. I say, okay. So I go out to the Pennsbury Manor. This is what the house looks like. And it's hilarious because I'm thinking to myself, well, what am I going to do about this? We're going to have to interview everybody here. Everybody that works here. It's 100 people that work there and find out, if it was an inside job. Well, one of the things that we found out, hey, you guys remember the Tom Cruise movie, Mission Impossible? Remember the first one where Tom Cruise is coming down from the ceiling? He's got that wire, and it holds him up. He's going to steal that material out of the computer. And if one bead of perspiration falls on the ground, anything like that, all the police, everybody come rushing in because the alarms will go off. Well, it wasn't like that. No. So when I got to the door, right here, there was a big muddy footprint. Well, let me tell you something. That's a clue. I went to the FBI Academy for 16 weeks. That's a clue, okay? And yeah, you know what happened? They kicked the door in. And it was muddy that night. Remember I told you it rained on a March night, Friday night? They kick the door in, they go in, they steal the material. So what happens is, of course, now we have some idea that it wasn't an inside job. Because if it was an inside job, you probably wouldn't have to kick the door in. All right? Smart. So we still had to interview everybody. We did that over the course of 3 weeks. We talked to everybody. There was no clue, no idea. It's because it was outside burglary. So we have to look outside into the community. Well, we did what law enforcement usually does. We took all the information and we put it on a shelf and we just waited for a lead. Finally, another Saturday morning, about 6 weeks later, I get a call from the state trooper. He says, we got a lead on the Pennsbury Manor job. Now, you got to remember, when this thing happened, it was all over the front page of the Bucks County Courier-Times, all the newspapers, everywhere in that area. So it was a big deal. It was on the front page. So, we got the lead about 6 weeks later. The troopers called me and they said, listen, we need you to come up to the prison up there in Bucks County. We want you to talk to somebody. Okay. So what had happened was the night before, Friday night again, about 11:30, this individual was driving down I-95 there outside that area, and there was this guy up here in the middle. And as he's driving down, he's weaving because he had been drinking his beer again. So a very, very astute young state trooper sees this and pulls him over. And when he pulls him over, he walks up to the car. And as he's walking to the car, he gets a bolo, which is an announcement, okay? Be on the lookout. There was a burglary at a pizza parlor right there in Ben Salem. And the individuals who did the burglary stole the safe out of the pizza parlor. So this trooper, he's not paying attention to that. He hears it, but he's got a car stop. He's got an intoxicated driver, he thinks. So he walks up to the car, says, license and registration, please. Guy pulls out his license and registration. It's okay. It's all correct. Gives it to him. He goes, okay, it's good. He looks at him, looks at his eyes, got a flashlight, nothing there. So he does what we call a wing spread search. He just looks in the back of the car. He doesn't go into the car, just looks in the back seat. And behind the driver's side back seat on the floor was a safe. That's a clue. Of course, it was the safe from the burglary at the pizza parlor. So he arrests him and charges him with a F1 felony, which is burglary. So he's sitting in jail. Next morning, he calls the public defender he's going to get, And he says, I got some information about the Pennsbury Manor heist, and I want to talk to the FBI. So the trooper and myself, we go up to talk to him, and we find out, yeah, he says, I was involved. I was there with my 2 friends. We stole this stuff to try to go sell. There was so much publicity, we didn't sell it. I said, great. I said, where is it? He said, well, we packed it up in these green trash bags, and we hid it in my girlfriend's garage. Okay, where does she live? Good. So meanwhile, we send out troopers to go talk to the other 2 guys. They get arrested. We go to the girlfriend's house. By now, it's 9 o'clock at night on Saturday night. Knock on the door. I've got an FBI raid jacket on. The state police are standing there, and they've got their uniforms. And we see the father of the girl. And she's 19. So, you know, when the FBI and the state police show up at 9 o'clock at night on Saturday night at your house, it's kind of scary, right? So she says, the father says, okay, he gets the daughter. She comes out. And we say, look, we're here because we talked to your boyfriend, and he told us what happened. And she said, yeah. She said, they brought that stuff, and, you know, they put it in the garage. I said, great. I said, let's go get it. Now, we couldn't prove she knew what it was. You know, she didn't ever look, she said, so she didn't know. I said, let's go get it. And she looks at me and she goes, well, they didn't tell you everything, did they? And I said, what? She said, well, they told us to get rid of it. I said, what do you mean get rid of it? She said, well, we took it all down and we threw it into the Delaware River to try to get rid of all the artifacts. I said, well, why'd you do that? And she said, because they told us to. Okay. I said, well, let's go. Show us where it is. We put her in a car, and we drive back down to Philadelphia, to Delaware Avenue, where they had gone into the river and thrown everything in. And we couldn't believe what she was telling us. So the next morning, of course, we get the Philadelphia dive team, police dive team, put them in the river, and there's all kind of stuff in that river. Cars, people, you wouldn't believe. But luckily, there was a lot of artifacts. So that next morning, the Philadelphia dive team started pulling out the bags, and we were able to get about 34 of the 39 pieces back, okay? And these are all the pewter pieces that went to the bottom that were still in the trash bag. Luckily, these all sunk and they were recovered. Again, you know, about $350,000 worth of art antiques from the 1700s. But unfortunately, we did lose this. This is a jewelry casket that was actually owned by Mrs. Penn, and it was from the 1680s. It was considered one of the finest pieces, examples of that type of artistry from that time period. That still existed, but we lost that. Why? It's made of wood, and it floated down the Delaware River, and it's gone. You know, we'll never get it back. They bought another one. The state did, not owned by Penn, for about $80,000. That's what they cost. But unfortunately, we lost this piece of history. So everybody in here, all of us, we let our kids down, our grandchildren down, because they'll never get to see this, right? Our grandparents saved them for us, saved it for us, and we got a chance to see it, but our kids won't. So that's why cultural heritage protection is so important. And the loss of cultural heritage is a lot more than just money or objects. It's our history. And when we lose our history, you know, we're doomed, really. We need to know what happened. We need to see these objects, because seeing and feeling an object is much more than just reading about it or seeing a picture. It's the real thing. And when you have the real thing, it makes a big difference. Well, anyway, why that's important is because those 3 guys were charged with theft of major artwork. That statute that was passed as a result of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. That was the first time in the United States that we charged that crime. The FBI used it, and it's been used many times. It was upheld in the Third Circuit appeal, in Third Circuit Courts of Appeal, and it's been used many times since, but that was the first time. Remember, $5,000 or more, over 100 years old. This was $100,000 or more, over 100 years old. Stolen from a museum, which is what that was. So it fit the crime, and it was used for the first time. Well, we're here today, we're talking about the Southeast Photography Museum here at the school. And how many of you have not been to it? You got to go. She got a fabulous exhibit. I just saw it tonight. Fantastic, a brand new exhibit of some of the great works of art. There's Andy Warhol in there. There's material that you wouldn't believe, I couldn't believe. It's great. So you have to go over and see it. So we have to talk about a photograph that we recovered just this year, in fact. This particular photograph was created in 1941 when Winston Churchill went to Ottawa. And in 41, he was trying to convince the United States. He was trying to convince, I think it was the United States. He was trying to convince Canada to enter the war on the side of the British, Second World War. So he addressed the Canadian Parliament to explain how badly they were needed. Well, after the address to the Canadian Parliament on December 30th, 1941, Youssef Karsh, the photographer, the famous Canadian, probably one of the most famous Canadian photographers, one of the greatest photographers, asked him if he could take a picture of him, do a portrait. And just to give you an idea, this was Youssef Karsh in 1941. And to give you an idea of what he's done, you can see some of these iconic portraits. I mean, this Dali piece, you see in almost all of his books. That's a Youssef Karsh portrait. Of course, here's Einstein. How many people have seen this one? Just, you have, Ernest Hemingway, everybody's seen that one. Of course, Martin Luther King, Audrey Hepburn with the long neck, everybody's seen. So these are very, very famous portraits done by Youssef Karsh. So one of the most famous he ever did was the Roaring Lion, and that was of Winston Churchill that night. In that photograph, which I'll show you shortly, Winston Churchill looks very pissed off, very, very angry. And the reason was he had his cigar, and Karsh walked up and said, "Excuse me, sir," and took the cigar out of his hand, and then took the picture, and it really upset Winston for a minute or two. So you'll see the photograph. He looks like a roaring lion, but it's a great photograph. Well, during COVID, December of 2020, the portrait, which hung in the, I guess in one of the rooms, not the room, one of the main rooms, the ballrooms at the Chateau de Laurier in Ottawa, was stolen. Now remember, during COVID, everything was shut down. So there was no parties going on. There was very few people in the hotel. And someone went in and took that piece off the wall and put a fake up, replaced it with a fake portrait, the same portrait, but a copy. And it stayed up there for probably 2 or 3 months before anyone noticed that this is not quite right. This is not the right portrait. And so that set off a 2-year investigation to recover the actual photograph by Youssef Karsh of the Roaring Lion. Ultimately, here's the Chateau de Laurier. It's in Ottawa. It's right across from the Canadian Parliament, and it's used often, most of the time, it's used during the legislative meetings by all the different legislators where they stay when they go for Parliament in Canada. And that that photograph was taken down. Here you can see this was the Roaring Lion. You can see the face because he lost his cigar. Well, after a 2-year investigation, we had put all the information out all over the world to try to find this piece. And it was difficult because it's not the only one in existence. There are other, copies of that specific photograph that Karsh, authorized. But most of them are different in sizes. That's what you're going to find out. When it comes to, old books, like Shakespeare's First Folios, those type of things, they're going to be cut over the years. They're going to have notations in them. There's going to be something that's specific to every one of them. And that's what I've found with all these old books that I've recovered and things like that. Well, this one, of course, was cut a certain way to fit into the frame that it was going to be held in. And so as a result, it was unique. But no one knew that because you wouldn't be able to tell that because of the way it was framed inside the inside the pieces. So we had all that information and we kept that from the public so that we could identify it. Ultimately, it was actually sold in London. A person from Canada, from Ottawa, put it on consignment to one of the auction houses, Sotheby's, in London, and it was sold through that auction house to a collector in Italy. And that collector only paid $5,000 for it. This piece is valued at around $50,000. And he paid $5,000 for it because everybody thought it was just another copy. But he collected it because he thought it was really interesting. So ultimately, we were able to trace that to the auction at the auction house. And we were able to get in contact with them. Now, I'm a member of a heritage crime task force out of Vienna, the OSCE in Vienna, which is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So as a result, we've had contacts with the Carabinieri and with the Metropolitan Police in London, and we were able to all work together to be able to recover this piece and have it returned to Chateau de Laurier. Ultimately, as well, we were able to identify the thief, Jeffrey Wood. He was convicted, and just last month, he received a 2-year prison sentence for the theft and the attempted sale of the Roaring Lion. So the Roaring Lion is back at the Chateau de Laurier in its place of honor. In fact, Youssef Karsh, the photographer, actually lived at the Chateau de Laurier. He was given a suite of rooms where he stayed. So in that one room where that particular photograph is, there's Einstein, he's there, Audrey Hepburn's there, a number of different photographs that Karsh did. If you ever get up there to Ottawa, visit the Chateau de Laurier, go into that, it's open to the public, go into that room and see their wonderful portraits. And what's really neat is that in this exhibition that's on today at the Southeastern Photograph Museum, there's an exhibition of Youssef Karsh photographs. Yeah, and actually, I guess it's a mock-up of his darkroom that you can go look at. So it's a fantastic tie-in. Go take a look. I think you'll enjoy that. Youssef Karsh, Canadian photographer, one of the greatest in the world. He did those fabulous photographs that we've all seen. Okay, Jeffrey Wood's in prison, thank goodness. Last but not least, we're going to talk about a theft, an armed robbery. We did a little bit with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Now we're going to tell you about Operation Bullwinkle. This is a theft and recovery of a Rembrandt 1630 self-portrait. It was valued at $35 million. It's the fourth most valuable piece I ever was involved in the recovery of. Fourth, yeah, wow. So anyway, third, okay, that I was ever involved with. $35 million for this particular painting. What had happened was, in the year 2000, quite a long time ago, 25 years ago, the Swedish National Museum in Stockholm, Sweden, was a victim of an armed robbery. On December 23rd, at about 5:30 in the evening, it was dark, it was cold, 3 individuals with machine guns, went into the museum. They put the few guards that were there on the floor. There were no visitors. It was that close to Christmas and at night. So they would put people on the floor, and then the 2 of them ran around the museum. They stole 3 paintings, 2 by Renoir and the Rembrandt. Meanwhile, one of the people with the machine gun held the guards on the floor. They went in, they stole these 3 paintings. Total value of the heist, 2 Renoirs and the Rembrandt, $42 million. That was the biggest art heist in Swedish national history from the Swedish National Museum. Well, what they did was, to get away, you see the museum is right on the end of the peninsula. So they had set off 2 car bombs on the main roads leading to the museum. That stopped their responders, police and fire. It took them 40 minutes to get past those car bombs, to get to the museum. Secondly, they had put down tack strips so that if they did get past, it would knock out their tires. So of course now they're stuck. What are they going to do? They can't leave because the roads are clogged. What they had done was they had parked a high-speed boat at the bottom of the pier right next to the museum. So they made their getaway up into the harbor in a high-speed boat. So all 3 of them ran out the museum, jumped into their little boat, took off up into the harbor. It's a pretty good heist. Think about it. Machine guns, car bombs, tack strips. They get away in a high-speed boat. There was a movie a few years later called The Italian Job, which kind of used some of the same ideas, you know. I had a case involving a recovery of one of the original Bill of Rights. It was sent to North Carolina for ratification in 1789, and it was stolen by a Civil War Union trooper from North Carolina in 1865. And it was interesting. We recovered that. And you know the movie Independence, Independence Day or whatever? The one Nicolas Cage, he recovered the Declaration of Independence. National, yeah, that was based on that recovery of the. So you know, movies follow life. That's what it's about. So the same thing happened here. So these 3 guys, they get away in their boat. They go up into the city, Stockholm, and they run up a pier, a bunch of steps up into the city with these paintings and leave their boat there. Meanwhile, a fisherman who was there tying his boat up sees this happen. He thinks it's kind of strange these guys go running up with these packages, and he doesn't think much about it, but it's a little strange. But he just leaves it at that. Next morning, of course, the front pages of all the newspapers are full of the big heist from the National Museum. So this fisherman, he calls the local police, and he says, listen, I saw these 3 guys running up the steps down by the water. He said, and I think I know where the boat is that they had used. So they say, great. These two detectives, they go over to meet him. He tells them the number of the boat, shows them the boat. And on the side of the boat, of course, is a number, right? It's a registration number. So they look that up, and they go find the owner of the boat. Great police work. So they walk in. They say, we want to talk to you about the boat that you own. And the guy looks at me and says, well, I don't own that anymore. I sold it 2 months ago. And they look at him. They go, oh, boy. They say, well, do you know who you sold it to? He says, I have no idea. It was a couple of guys that had come in. They wanted to buy it, so I sold it to them. It was for sale to begin with. I had advertised it, so they came and got it. So they're really depressed. They start walking away. They're thinking this is terrible, and they're walking out the door. And the guy goes, "Well, wait a minute. Would you like to have their credit card number?" Yeah, they use their credit card. It's just like those guys. It's the same thing. They use their credit card. So as a result, of course, they got the credit card number, and they went back and they arrested 10 people that were all involved in this heist. It was all planned out. 10 different people. They put them all on trial. 7 were convicted, 3 were acquitted. The 7 that were convicted got 10-year prison sentences for the theft of the 3 paintings. Actually, during that trial, they recovered one of the Renoirs. They actually got one back. So they were happy. Well, nothing happens then. That was in 2001. 2000 was a theft. 2001, they got the recovery of the Renoir. 10 people, put on trial. 7 convicted, 3 acquitted. Nothing happens till 2005. So I get a call. I've started the art crime team. One of the agents in L.A., Los Angeles, calls me. He says, what do you know about a heist of a Renoir from Sweden? I said, well, there was a big heist 4 or 5 years ago. Let me look it up. And I said, yeah, there was a big heist of Renoirs and a Rembrandt. He says, yeah. He said, well, here's the deal. We've been doing this investigation against this guy, Boris the Bulgarian. Sorry, Julia. Anyway, Boris the Bulgarian is a drug dealer in Los Angeles. And they've got him on a 10-year hit for 2 kilos of cocaine that he had sold. So they've already got him on this if they want to pull the trigger, and indict him. He said, but meanwhile, he's been talking about trying to sell a stolen Renoir. And they think it's the Renoir from the Swedish National Museum. So I said, look, why don't you get the painting? We got drug cases all over the country. Why don't get the painting first and see what we can do? So he says, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. A couple of weeks later, he calls me. He says, great news. He said, last night, Boris was going to go out and sell the Renoir. He went to a pawn shop on Wilshire Boulevard where the Renoir was in the safe. He said, when he came out with it out of the pawn shop, we arrested him, and we recovered the painting. They took it to the Getty. The curators at the Getty Museum said that was it. It was called Le Parisien. It was about a $3.5 million painting by Renoir. And so we recovered the painting. That's fantastic. I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, the special agent in charge here in L.A. wants to have a press conference on Monday. I said, well, look, before you do that, why don't you ask Boris if he knows where that $35 million Rembrandt is? Maybe he can help us with that one. So he said, okay. So he goes back to talk to Boris. Comes back, calls me, says, hey, good news. Boris knows where the Rembrandt is. I said, well, where is it? He said, it's still in Stockholm. It's still in Sweden. He said, and he knows who has it. I said, well, what else could he do for us? He says, well, he can introduce us to the people who have it. So we started Operation Bullwinkle at that point, which is an undercover operation to go to Sweden, meet with the criminals, and have them sell us for a buy bust of the $35 million Rembrandt. So in this case, I was acting as the undercover agent. I was actually acting as a person who was an authenticator for the Russian mob. And I was going to do the negotiations with these armed robbers in Sweden. So we go to Sweden, and we talk to the Swedish National Police, and they say, well, you can't do it in Sweden because Boris has an arrest warrant. Turned out he had arrest warrants in 10 countries. Yeah, and we couldn't do it because he had an arrest warrant in Sweden. So we did the next best thing. Now, when you think that we could go to Norway, it's right across the border, right? It's right there. Now, we went to Denmark, which is a 5-hour train ride, Copenhagen from Stockholm. And we set up the operation in Copenhagen, Denmark. And we used this hotel, Scandic Hotel. Anybody been to the Scandic in Copenhagen? It's right by the train station. No? Okay. Anybody been to Copenhagen? I'm sure you all have, right? A lot of you? Okay. So we set it up there working with the Danish National Police and the Swedish police at the Scandic Hotel. And I want to show you this. Remember, I'm the undercover guy for the Russian mob, right? Authenticator. And this is my big-time room at the hotel. So we didn't waste any taxpayer dollars, all right? Just let you know. We had a per diem we could spend. That was it. So this was the deal. So we met with these individuals for about 2 weeks. Finally, we came up with a price, $250,000 cash for the Rembrandt painting. Remember, it's a $35 million painting. We're going to give them $250,000 in cash, U.S. Okay, they go home. I send them home. I said, look, this is it because the Russians are getting nervous. If you don't go do this deal now, it's not going to happen. So, okay, so they go home, back to Stockholm. That night, I get a call from the Swedish National Police. He said these guys were running from hotel to hotel, from house to house, talking, doing all kind of nonsense. And he says the next morning, the three guys that we're dealing with, get back on the train, and they come down to Copenhagen. So now they're on their way, and they're carrying a bag. It's a shopping bag with an object the size of the painting, a rectangular object inside the bag. So the Swedish National Police, they call, they say, they're coming down, they got the bag, do you want us to arrest them? I said, no, let them come. Let's see how it works out. Let them come down. And I give them credit. The Swedes said, okay. They let them come to Denmark. I can tell you, NYPD would never let a painting from the Met go to Canada, but they let this thing come to another country. So they come down on the train, they get off, they come walking back towards my hotel room. 2 of them come upstairs. 1 stays outside. The guy with the bag is waiting outside. So they come up, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to frisk them, okay, because they've been out of my sight. Nobody's been watching. They could come back, and if they're armed, they might try to rob me. And that would be what we call a reverse. And that's always a danger, And it's always good to come home with the same amount of holes you left with. Mrs. Wittman always told me that. So I said, okay, we're going to have to check you out, make sure you didn't get bring any weapons back. They said, okay, go ahead. I said to them, the reason I'm doing this, because it really is a police move, is because if you steal the money, the Russians will kill me. So they said, okay. Notice how they pixelate my head after you already saw me? I actually saw this on TV. That's where I knew it. It was on NBC News after the case happened. And one night I was at home, and it came on the 6 o'clock news. I'm like, that's me. So anyway, so we do that. Everything's good. Next thing I have to do is show them the money. This is important. This is a very important part of the deals. I had done this many times, okay, by then, but it's really an important time. And why it's so interesting is because if you notice, nobody's looking at me. Everybody's looking at Mr. Benjamin Franklin. Okay. You got to remember, this is 5 years after the heist. They've made no money, so they're finally going to have a payday. So everybody's looking at the $250,000 in cash. And they're very happy with it. So now they looked at it, they see it's good, all the money's there. I say to them, go, get the painting now, bring it back, let's get this done. They looked at me and said, okay, all right, they believe me. They believe me at that point. So they leave, the 2 guys. So I'm standing there waiting, I'm thinking, okay, they gotta go downstairs, get that guy and come back up, right? 5 minutes. 5 minutes goes by, 10 minutes goes by, 15 minutes. I get a call, it's the Swedish police. They say, something's wrong. I said, what happened? He said, they ran away. I said, what do you mean they ran away? They took off. They said, do you want us to arrest them? I said, well, if they go on the train, arrest them, but wait till then to see what happens. I couldn't believe it. I'm pacing back and forth down that little room. We've been working on this for months to get this job done. We showed them the money. Everything's good. I can't understand what I could have said or what I did to screw this up, okay? So I'm walking back and forth. Finally, a call, another call on the phone. Now it's the Swedish police again. They say, everything's okay. I said, what do you mean? He said, they had gone to another hotel, and the night before, a 4th person had come down from Stockholm, and he had the painting. The piece that they had, that bag, was just a decoy. So if we had arrested them on the train, if we had done anything, they would have known, that they were doing a counter surveillance against us to see if we were real. So if we had done anything, it would have messed the case up. So as a result, the 3 guys were on their way back. The one guy at the hotel had already been arrested, the person who came down the night before, and the other guys were coming back to bring me the painting. They come back upstairs. Of course, the first thing we're going to have to do is authenticate the Rembrandt. Now, I got to tell you, I'm not an authenticator for Rembrandts, you know. But what happened was I had gotten a great photograph of the front and back of the painting from the museum. And there were 4 screws that held this Rembrandt in the frame, small frame. And I looked at the screws, you know, and I looked at the angle that they were turned at, and that's what I was checking. So that's why I tell you this, because if you have artwork, take pictures of the front and back, because it's important what both sides look like. So I get them, and I look at the painting, and I see that the 4 screws had never been changed. The angles were the same. So I said to him, I said, "You never even took it out of the frame, did you?" And they looked at me, and they said, "Of course not. It's a Rembrandt." I said, "Oh, excuse me, right? I mean, you know, I thought that you guys are interested in artwork." And they said, "No, we just want the money." But they even knew they had a Rembrandt. So they were in awe of their own stolen painting, all right? So it's interesting that they would be feeling that way. I said, "Excuse me," right? And I was at the Frick doing the talk, and Steve Martin was in the crowd. And I looked at him, he laughed when I said that. Because I really did say that. That was his term, you know. You guys remember Steve Martin and "excuse me"? It was his joke. Anyway, so we're going to authenticate. That's what we're doing here. By this point, you know, I knew it was real. I knew it was legit. I'm raking it with black light and playing around. I was trying to get information from them, more information for the prosecution. And so finally I look at it, it's all good, you know. There's nothing left to be done except the bust. So here's the deal. You have to listen very closely. When I say this is a done deal, that's the code word. Done deal is the code word for the Swedish national and Danish national SWAT teams to come into the room. They're going to come busting in right away. They're going to save the painting. They're going to save me, because remember, I'm by myself. I have no weapons, and they're going to save the day. Watch what happens. You're going to listen, done deal. Done deal. There we go. Here we come. Here they come. Here they come. Right now. Here they come. They're coming in. Thank God. Here they go. You got to remember, by that time, I'm hiding in the bathroom. Yeah, I'm hiding in the bathroom because the best place to be is in the bathtub. I used to teach at the undercover school, Quantico, and I'd say when the takedowns happen, get in the bathtub because you got some protection, you know, in case people start shooting. So then I ran out of the room and I ran down the hall, and the agent from California, LA, was there, and I handed him the painting. And we took it upstairs to what we call a safe room, a different room upstairs, and I put it on the bed, and I put the $250,000 in cash in front of the painting. So it gives you an idea, you know, what it's all about. This is what art theft's all about. It's all about the money and the art. But that's $250,000 in actual $100 bills with a $35 million Rembrandt. And it's really neat, because remember I told you in the very beginning that these art crimes aren't about art history, and it's 2 different things? Well, you know, Rembrandt did 100 of these self-portraits, believe it or not, 100. And they're called tronies, Tronies. And there's a reason. The reason that Rembrandt would do 100 tronies was because of 2 things. Number 1, he didn't have to pay a model. It was his own picture. And number 2, great advertising. Remember, he was a portrait artist. So if you wanted to get your picture taken, you went to Rembrandt to get your portraits done for your children and yourself. So that was advertising and cheapness, you know. So that's where art business and art crime come together. It all works together. Great painting. The reason it's a great painting is because if you look at it closely, I don't have a really good photograph of it for you, but in this particular slide, you can see on the side of his face, you see he was 24 years old. And you notice how he took the portrait and he did it from the side with a shadow on the other side? That's called chiaroscuro. So he was one of the first to utilize chiaroscuro, which is a shadow of portrait that you see today on magazine covers everywhere. You know, photographs, paintings. Up until this point, portrait artists would just do a straight on. And you've seen many of those, right? Like, you know, like kings and queens, they do the straight on shot. Well, this was chiaroscuro, which is more dramatic. and it gave an air to a painting. And Rembrandt was one of the first to do that. And here he's 24 years old, and he's doing it on copper. It's a piece of copper. It's not a canvas. He had done this on. So it's considered a very, very nice piece. This is the catch of the day shot. You know how when you go fishing, you guys are all living in Florida, you go fishing, and you catch a nice fish? That's the catch, catch of the day shot. So it's important. Last but not least, this is an important case. Why? Because you know what? You had 3 countries, the United States, Denmark, and Sweden, working together to recover this one artwork. Now, they wouldn't do it for Mercedes. You wouldn't do it for a Chevrolet, right? But you're going to do it for a Rembrandt. Why? Because it's important to all of us. It's not just a piece of property. It's a piece of cultural heritage, important to all of us, important to the world. So we work together to get it back.
You travel the world.
Yes.
You're like Rene Russo in the Thomas Crown Affair.
Well,
I'm sure you look just as good in a lace dress. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Robert Wittman, Art Cop. The book is priceless.
I think it's $19. And it's in the back over here. If you're all interested in getting one, or they're great Christmas gifts. Really, good Christmas and birthday gifts. I'll be happy to sign it for you, whatever you want in there. You're my best friend, Joe. I love you. Whatever you want. Happy to do it. Thank you so much for it. Let me say one thing. If you have a question, I'm happy to answer. I got time. I don't have to go home till tomorrow. So, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, they want to. Yeah, go ahead. I'll repeat it. So the question is, if someone gets a stolen painting, what do they do with it? They get caught and go to jail. You can't do anything with it. 13 artworks that never were recovered. Yeah, that's right. From the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. There's lots more out there than that, but there's 13 artworks that weren't recovered from that heist. But basically, there's not much you can do with a stolen painting. You saw what happened. Throughout my career, I recovered Rembrandts, Goyas, Picassos, all stolen, and it's the same thing over and over. The criminals are better criminals than they are businessmen. They don't realize that the real art in an art heist, it isn't the stealing, it's the selling. What you going to do with it? So they're used to stealing cars, and they'll chop them up and get more money than the car's worth. But you can't do that to a painting. You can't do it to an artwork. So in the end, they get caught with it. The other thing that people always ask me, what about these collectors that have these stolen artworks that they hide in their basements and they go down and look at them, right? Everybody wants to know about that. And that's called the Dr. No question, because there was a famous James Bond movie in 1962 called Dr. No, you guys remember. And in that movie, James Bond goes into the caverns of Dr. No and he sees a stolen Goya on an easel as he goes up its steps, to go into the cavern. You might remember that. And he kind of looks at it like, I wondered where that went, because it had been stolen the year before from the National Gallery. It really was. It was a stolen painting by Goya. So what had happened was one of the producers of the movie read about it, and he had a copy made, and he put that into the movie. So now everybody thinks that there's a Dr. No out there hiding these stolen paintings. The truth is, I've never met one. I've met people who steal little items, but when we come to these $1 million paintings, no. Because, if you're going to pay $250,000 for any artwork, you want good title, right? I mean, it's a lot of money. I don't care if you're a rich man or not, it's a lot of money. So you want good title, and you don't want to be in a position where somebody has to go to jail because you bought it. So it's a situation where you never see. Interestingly enough, after that movie, the producer went to go collect his painting, and somebody stole it. True story. Lady in the back had a question. I'll get to you.
Yes. As a trained fine artist, I've always been fascinated with forgeries. How much during your career did you come across where paintings were replaced with forgeries and then it was discovered?
A lot.
Aside from the photograph.
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah. And that's the 3 F's of art crime. Christina, frauds, forgeries, and fakes. Let me know when you want me back.
Okay.
Okay.
The Rembrandt that you recovered was valued at $35 million. I'm just curious how the deal was made for only $250,000.
Well,
they took a hell of a cut.
yeah, it was a good Good question, because that's all they could get. Remember, it was sitting in a bedroom wrapped up in a velvet bag for 5 years while they were looking for somebody to buy it. And so they were going to make $250. But remember, $250 is all profit. They had no investment in it. You know what I mean? Except for the 7 guys that went to jail for 10 years. By the way, these were the 3 guys that were acquitted. Remember that 10 of them were put up and were prosecuted. 7 were convicted. 3 were acquitted. These were the 3 guys that were acquitted. So obviously they were involved. And one of them was Boris, the Bulgarian's son. So he gave up his son in order to help himself with the drug deal in California. And it did, because he got a probation sentence. It was a 10-year prison sentence, knocked down to probation for all of his help in the case. So the judge gave him probation rather than, jail time. So Boris did well. His son, not so much. Well, actually, it did work out. To finish it off, the 3 guys, they were convicted of trying to sell stolen property. They got 1-year jail sentences in the EU, in Sweden. Within 3 months, they were out of jail because the European Union courts said that the use of the father against the son, Boris against his son, was a civil rights violation. So they set him free. And so, I don't care. All I want to do is get the painting back. That was the main thing. So, whatever, right? That's how it worked out.
Does the FBI ever have a working theory about the Gardner heist?
The question is, does the FBI have a working theory about the Gardner heist? Yeah, the working theory is that 2 guys dressed as Boston police officers went into the museum on St. Patty's Day night and stole them.
I thought you were going to tell me I had to buy your book to find out.
Now, the next part of that is, in my book, I talk about an undercover case I did. In that case, we actually recovered 4 paintings that were stolen at gunpoint from the Fine Art Museum in Nice, 2 Bruegels, a Monet and a Sicily, which you can see at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, the Monet and the Sicily. They're back. The 2 Bruegels are in Nice. And we also recovered 2 Picassos that were stolen from Diana Picasso, her apartment in Paris, worth about $60 million. So we recovered those pieces in that case while working with those groups, but we didn't get the 2 back from the Gardner. Now, the French were more interested in getting their paintings, because let's face it, I mean, the 2 that went to Musée d'Orsay, that's the National Gallery of France. That's their government gallery, like the National Gallery in Washington. So the fact is, they really wanted those back, The Gardner paintings, they're from the U.S. In France, it might not even be a violation anymore because it's been 30 years, right? So it's a little different story. It's not as much interest. Yes, ma'am. So you have to get the book and check all that out. Go ahead.
At the beginning of your presentation, I saw an image about the American Reich, I think it was called. Were you involved in anything with recovering stolen artwork that was stolen during the Nazi regime and repatriating
Right.
that back to the families?
Yeah. What you saw was my second book called The Devil's Diary, Alfred Rosenberg and the Stolen Secrets of the Third Reich. And what that was a book about a case I did in 2016 for the U.S. Holocaust Museum for my company in private practice. And we recovered a diary of Alfred Rosenberg, he was Hitler's chief civil scientist. He's the guy that came up with all the ideas of the Holocaust, the Aryan races, the ladders of the races. All that was Alfred Rosenberg, and he had written a 400-page diary which went missing after Patton's troops recovered it from a castle, at the end of the Second World War. So the Holocaust Museum wanted that diary back to see what was in it because it was a legitimate, real diary. The other ones that the Germans did, the other high-ranking Germans, they were nonsense. They were all propaganda. Rosenberg was actually writing what he was thinking in his meetings with Hitler during the war. So what they wanted was a smoking gun about the Holocaust that Hitler knew, and they were hoping it would be in a diary. So we recovered that. That's what that book's about. Did I recover any artwork? I have worked on cases. I recovered a Renoir that was in the possession of Park West that was returned to a family in New York. They paid $250,000 for it. It was legitimate. They just they didn't know it was stolen. It was yeah. They didn't know it was stolen, and they did repatriate it back to the family. So I've been involved in a number of different types of cases like that. Usually, the FBI is not going to get involved in those cases because it's not criminal material. In other words, it's all under treaty. So, if someone buys a painting from a gallery in Vienna and it comes to the United States, it's not necessarily stolen in the U.S. At this point, technically, it's a very technical situation. The Nazis were in charge. They were the legitimate government of Germany at the time. So when they made it legal to take these artworks, it was legal for the people to take the artworks to Germany. Now, we signed treaties after the war to recover and repatriate. So under that stipulation with the treaties, that's how people are getting things back. But it's very difficult, especially today, because it's been so long that the inheritors are very, very few and far between, and to be able to prove that you were that person, or that related to that person is difficult. But it still happens. It's still happening. Yeah, good question. She said that she thinks that she's heard that museums don't necessarily like to advertise when things are stolen, and they don't want anybody to know. And that is true. Oftentimes they don't even know it's stolen because it's there's so much material in archives that unless they do spot checks and really look for things, it's hard to find that something's missing. I can tell you right now, probably the Smithsonian with tens of millions of objects, there's stuff that's missing that they don't know about. And unless you do a full inventory, you'd never know. So are they loath to tell people? Yeah, because donors don't like that. They don't like the idea of people stealing from the museums. But I always say to them, if they don't tell us, you can't get it back. And what happens then is if someone gets away with it once, they come back and they keep doing it over and over. Very seldom do you see a situation where one piece is stolen. If it's over a course of time, I had another case involving material stolen from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. The guy was stealing material for 7 years, sold more than 200 items worth $2 million. Finally, there was 3 pieces that they noticed were gone, and they called us. We recovered them, but 200 other pieces. So it's really important that museums do, let people know or let the authorities know when things are missing. Well, we have one fellow over here.
So often when we see shows on TV, we hear about the FBI's profiling. And since the art crimes seems to be so much like pennies on the dollar, does the FBI have a profile of the type of criminal that are stealing or the type of person that is looking to either to buy something that they know is stolen? Because you can't just resell it or show it. Like you said in the Doctor No, it's not like, hey, people are coming over my house, you want to see my Rembrandt.
Right. Is there a profile?
So what's the profile? Because you always hear about the FBI's, we have a profile. We have a profile of the killer. We have a profile of this. Is there like a general profile of this type of criminal?
The only profile I would tell you throughout my career is that I've only arrested one woman. All the rest were men. Only one woman. Because women are smarter than men. They are. It's true. Absolutely. Women are smarter than men. They don't do stupid stuff, and men do. And, they think things out, and they tell their husbands not to do it, And so as a result, that's the only profile I could tell you. You saw the picture. It's all kind of weird people, and I'd say the only one that I could say would be maybe a profile a little bit would be forgers and fakers, because they have to have a little more sophistication in the art market to be able to sell their art, their fakes. But that's for 3 F's of art crime. Frauds, forgeries, and fakes. And so, but I would say that would be one of the, I used the profilers in a number of different cases. And it never worked out for me. So, it's hit or miss. You only hear about the good cases that they were right on. They never tell you about the cases they weren't right on. Yeah. All right, folks, listen, I'm going to stick around. You can talk. I'll talk to you and answer questions. But you're a great crowd. Thank you so much. Get over to the museum. Take a look.